get to our NFL Eagles insider now, John McMullen. Follow John on Twitter at JF McMullen, PhillyVoice.com, SI.com. It's where you can find all of John's written work, Birds 365, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., Monday to Friday. If you're going to bet on anyone that the Eagles selected in this NFL draft, Howie says it's Landon Dickerson. So here on Sports Betting Radio, the question is if John McMullen would bet on Landon Dickerson with all of his injuries that he's had to deal with throughout his career, and still at a very young age, despite playing at the highest level, coming from Alabama. John wrote about this. Article is out and available today on SI.com. So, Johnny Mac, I ask you, betting on Landon Dickerson, is that a good bet?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's a good bet at 37. It's interesting. I mean, Howie kind of said that he would bet on Landon Dickerson. I think, they think the surest thing, obviously, is Devontae Smith at number 10, and we'll see how that works out. And I think at least for the short term, it certainly is. And we'll see if he can hold up at 166 pounds. But, there's concern, but you also go to the law of averages and you say, okay, he's had a ton of injuries, tore his both ACLs, couple ankle injuries, but he is young. He is an offensive lineman. I'm not as concerned with losing that explosion with the lower body issues as if you were a wide receiver, cornerback, or somebody who needs that extra gear. So I do think at some point you brace him up and you say, the law of averages is going to run in his favor. So I think it is a good bet, to be honest.
So if those injuries didn't exist, that's really a big-time hypothetical. But you mentioned this in the past, but I just wanted to ask you again for anyone who's missed it. He's what a top 10 potentially first-round draft pick. What do you evaluate his talent at without all these injuries piled up against him?
No, but I would say probably top 20 to 25. I think, those top 10 guys tend to be offensive tackles, with the exception of Quentin Nelson. He's probably an exception to that rule. I don't think he's quite at that level, although Baldy went out and said he's the best he's seen since Quentin Nelson from a playing standpoint when he was out there healthy at Alabama. That's mighty fine company, to say the least. I don't think he would have been a top 10 pick, but I think he would have easily been a first-round pick in the bottom of the round, and that's sort of how it works with when you have injury concerns. Certain teams will red flag a guy like the Eagles did with him and they did with Sidney Jones in the past, and they say, okay, we can't take him in the first round, but we'll take him in the second round. Other teams will say, it's got to be a day 3 guy with those types of injuries. So it depends where you put him. That's how the Eagles sort of handle things with the DK Metcalfs and players like that when they put a red flag on them. So it depends on the team. I'm sure certain teams did red flag him. But in the Eagles, Howie said he didn't want to, he wanted to have a little bit of risk. He didn't want to be risk averse, is how he described it. I agree with that. There's a cost benefit to this thing, and look, he's not going to be there. And that's what Howie said. He's not going to be there at 37 if there's no issues from a health standpoint. So you have to look at it from that perspective and say, our medical people cleared him. There's tremendous value here, and it's a good bet. I think it is a good bet. But as we know, Ryan, there's a lot of good bets, and sometimes you don't win them.
And that's sort of the NFL draft, John. And it's tough because this time of year, better than anyone how busy you've been and how much traction, your interviews and your show, Birds 365, has been getting, your appearances here. Everyone's obsessed with NFL draft content and talking about these prospects and who's going to pan out and how the teams should approach their draft strategy. But at the end of the day, it's gambling. Howie Roseman's gambling. He's essentially walking onto the casino floor and playing roulette, playing blackjack, a slot machine, whatever it is. Of the top 50 players drafted every year, John, what's the percent on how many of those guys actually pan out, meaning starters or a long, somewhat successful, given their draft spot, type of career?
Well, that depends on what your definition is, and I think everybody has different definitions. I said with Eitan the other day, my only valid draft grade is fifth-year options, which just came up this week. When you hit that fifth year, that class, you kind of know if your team picks up that fifth-year option, you're working out. You're valuable. You're at some point, you're a contributor. If they don't pick it up, you're probably not doing well. And you might get one last opportunity in your city, or you might be gone. But those fifth-year options are the only thing that's really, really relevant to me. And then even if you want to take it a step further, are you going to get a second contract is even more so with your original team. That means you're a success. That flat out means you're a success. Now, there are levels of success, all the way up from superstar down to role player. But if you're looking at it from just a draft standpoint, if you're getting a second contract out of a guy, that means he's contributing to your team, and that means he's been a success as a draft choice, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, other people look at it differently. Other people say, you got to be a star, you got to be this, you got to be that. But put pedigree in the equation and say, if you're a top 10 pick, you better be a star. If you're a first-round pick, you better be really good. And it depends on the person.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's just getting that second contract. Like you said, I mean, what's the average lifespan, so to speak, for these NFL players? I think it's like 3 years, maybe 4 years.
Yeah, it's a little over 3 years.
Yeah.
Now, that's a mean. So, obviously you have somebody like Tom Brady who plays forever. And, undrafted guys might stick around for a year, the vast majority. But, I mean, everything. I was talking, we had Dan Filio on today, does the National Football Show for JAKIB Media. I said one of my favorite players I ever covered was John Randall out in Minnesota. The guy wasn't even drafted when the draft was 12 rounds. 12 rounds, Ryan. He's in Canton. He's in the Hall of Fame. So, I mean, that's obviously extremely rare. But that tells you, I mean, there are outliers like Tom Brady, like John Randall. There are commonalities. If you're undrafted, you're probably not going to last 3 years. If you're a first-round pick, you are going to last 3 years unless you're an absolute you-know-what. The kid Tennessee drafted last year, the offensive lineman, had so many issues they had to move on. Can't think of his name off the top of my head. But, you have to be just a colossal, messed up, do everything wrong to not get 3 years, or obviously in the rare occasion you have just debilitating injuries, but they're going to give you they're going to keep giving you opportunities. So those guys get a longer rope. It's that old, it just is what it is. If you have more talent, you get longer rope. And that's what they call it in the league, talent versus tolerance. The more talent you have, the more tolerance you have. And that usually people talk about that with off the field stuff, but it's other stuff as well. And it's pedigree as well. If you're a first round pick, they're going to have more tolerance for you if you're screwing up and you're not doing what you're supposed to do versus an undrafted kid or even a 6th, 7th round pick.
What do you think teams in the NFL overall strategy, approach, what do you think they're doing wrong? And it just can't change because of, for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's a variety of reasons, but I ask that because, I look at Gainwell, the 4th round draft pick for the Eagles, Kenneth Gainwell. I feel like he's going to be a player for this team. And I say that with a broad scope. That could just be 5 to 10 snaps over the next couple of years, but make an impact, have a role, seize the field. And he doesn't get selected until the 4th round. And I feel like that running back position in particular, that's the case. That position is devalued, yet you see guys go 4th, 5th, 6th, undrafted, and they end up having a nice little career for themselves.
Yeah, there's always something. I think Kenneth was 5th. I don't even know anymore. I'm fried. I think McPherson was 4. But either way, yeah, I hear what you're saying. He's a day 3 pick. He had a tremendous season in Memphis. There's always a question when you have guys, and this year was very unique, and the fact that he opted out. So, he didn't play at all. And then he's also 5'8", so you have issues from that standpoint. He's not the most physical running back in the world. But if he did play, if he wasn't Memphis, if he had another 1,500-yard season, he probably would have been. I'd say probably a 3rd-round pick, but certainly a day 2 pick. And so it could be little things like that. Now, there are other guys who opted out. Obviously, most notably, your Jamar Chases, your Penei Sewells at the top of the draft. They're so talented, it's not going to affect them. But for a guy like Gainwell, it affected him. And, again, the Eagles got value at a deeper position in the draft. So I think it's a good roll of the dice. By no means do I think he's a guarantee or he's going to be. I think – you pencil him in as the complement to Miles Sanders. He's a really good receiver, so that's what he's projected to be in this league as a 3rd down back, and that fits in perfectly because Miles, that was his weakness last season, 3rd downs, pass receiving, pass protection. So on paper, it's a good fit. You got to see if he can handle the job. I mean, there's no guarantees with day 3 picks. There's never any guarantees. Let's be honest. And there might be 5-10 guys in every draft, okay, this guy's going to be good. It's just a matter of how good. There's not a ton of those guys. There really isn't, even in the 1st round. You start looking at those picks. I think it started right at 16 with Arizona, and they kind of reached for a linebacker, and you start to say, I was talking to so many personnel people leading up to the draft. They said that's where the cutoff was. Basically, they nailed it. It was basically 14, 15 players, and then you got a pretty significant drop. That's one of the reasons I criticize the Giants and who was the other team that traded out? Minnesota traded out. The Giants traded out from 11 because they didn't get Smith. The Vikings traded out from 14 because they didn't get Slater. I thought it was a mistake. Because you're getting under that line. And I think the Giants got Kadarius Toney, who I don't even think it's 1st round worthy. The Vikings got Darisaw, who I think is probably 1st round worthy, but no guarantees there at all. I didn't like it, and you're talking about gambling, you're talking about betting. There's absolutely no guarantee with these players. Now, Ryan, you hear everybody's great. Everybody's great. There's 40 first-round picks. It never works out that way.
No, it certainly doesn't. You mentioned Toney to the Giants. Talk about what the NFC East did in the draft. Who had a nice little draft, whether it's the Giants, Washington, or Dallas, who who swung and missed. Your thoughts and analysis on the three other teams in the NFC East.
Yeah, I thought the Giants were interesting for a number of reasons. And I thought Washington added the most talent, which tells you, even though I didn't necessarily like their first-round pick, I think they did a good job from there. I think the Giants were interesting because, as I said, I don't think Tony is a first-round pick. I think he's a manufactured touch player. I say it all the time. It's really difficult. You got to be really disciplined to keep those guys involved in the offense. And then I think, well, the Giants already have a number of good receivers on top of it. So they're not going to be wasting time. If you're in the guts of the game, you're not going to be looking at your play call sheet and saying, oh, we got to get Tony involved. I mean, they signed Kenny Galloway. They already had Shepard. They signed Kyle Rudolph for tight end. They got good playmakers. They're not going to be having Kadarius Toney on the top of their mind. Now, that said, they got Azeez Ojulari in the second round. And I think almost everybody rated that kid as a first-round pick. So if you told me they got him at 20, and I think they got Ojulari at 50. So if they took Toney at 50, I would say that's a good draft. but the weirdness of the NFL is once you're a first-round pick, you got that pedigree. So Tony has that pedigree instead of the second-round pick, and vice versa with Ojulari. So people will expect more out of Tony, and even though you're getting the same two players, it's a weird because you have different expectations.
Give us your thoughts on the Dallas Cowboys, and we get plenty of this from the national media. I mean, they talk about Dak Prescott every single day, it feels like. So just tying in what they did in the draft and really projecting ahead, how do the Cowboys stack up, and especially against the Eagles?
Well, I do think it's the best team in the division because they have the best quarterback in the division. Now there's significant holes as well. I think we all understand that with the Dallas Cowboys. It's interesting, I just talked about those fifth-year options. They didn't pick up the option on Kyle Van Der Esch, and that's an interesting one because I just said those are ultimately the best grades if you're looking at truly want to grade a team fairly. But there's, you got to add in the context. I mean, he's got neck injuries. That's the whole problem. That's why they can't guarantee anything. They don't know if he's going to be able to play. But he was a really good player for a short period of time when he was healthy, and that's why you have red flags, especially with necks and backs. And the Cowboys rolled the dice. It worked out for a very short time. It's probably not going to work out longer than that. Same thing with Jalen Smith, really, if you think about it. Worked out for a very, very short time. Now it's pretty clear they're looking in a new direction. He had that catastrophic knee injury in his last college game. He's going to be a top 5 pick. They got him in the second round. Worked out for a very short time. So I think it's kind of apropos because we're talking about Dickerson. And, they got to the problem with that is then you got to go through it again. And all of a sudden, they're drafting Parsons to replace one of those guys. And if you would have told me that 2 years ago, that they needed to replace Smith or Van Der Esch, I would have laughed at you. But that's how quickly things change. So the Cowboys, I mean, look, they got a lot of issues, but in a division where the other quarterbacks are Jalen Hurts, Daniel Jones, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, they got a pretty good leg up. You got to be honest about that.
Aaron Rodgers is the lead story here in the NFL headlines, and the Denver Broncos are one of the teams that are being discussed as a potential landing spot, John. And I'm hearing that, the Broncos are championship ready. And of course, Aaron Rodgers is that good. He's going to make a team a lot better. But I heard people who are credible on national platforms saying, well, Von Miller's coming back. They start rattling off these players, and I'm like, I'm confused here. So can you give me your thoughts on that?
Well, are they championship ready with Aaron Rodgers? Yes. Are they championship ready without Aaron Rodgers? Not even close. I mean, we were talking to Birds 365 because Jody's obsessed with this. The Eagles have no chance of getting Aaron Rodgers, zero. So forget about that. Throw it off the table. He doesn't want to play on the East Coast. He's just getting out of Green Bay. He doesn't want to be there. He wants to be on the West Coast, or he wants to be as close as the West Coast as possible. He would have loved to be in San Francisco or Los Angeles. It's not going to work out from a timing standpoint. The Rams looked into it before the Matthew Stafford trade, but then they made the trade. The Chargers obviously have Justin Herbert, so they're not looking. And the 49ers looked into it deeply and weren't able to get it done, and then drafted Trey Lance. So that part's not going to work out for him. So then you start looking at Denver and Las Vegas, and look, of those two situations, by far Denver would be the best. And I think it really has nothing to do with the team as much as it has to do with John Elway, because John Elway understands what a superstar quarterback needs and how you have to treat him, because he was a superstar quarterback. So he understands the whole philosophy and the whole way you have to run the organization. And he also did it with Peyton Manning at the end of his career. So he already knows what has to be done. So I think that's a positive for Denver. But as far as, that's why I was saying, if you bring Aaron Rodgers here, and it was a vacuum, and he was interested in coming here, this team wins 11, 12 games. I mean, that's how good he is. Yeah. And in Green Bay, I said, today, you obviously they're not playing, but they still have Aaron Rodgers. You expect that team to win 12 or 13 games. Now, will they win the Super Bowl? It's very difficult. Obviously, he's only got one. I laugh at that because it's very hard to do, and people think it's underachieving for some bizarre standpoint. But they're always in it. They're always making deep playoff runs. They might make the championship game. They might make the divisional round, whatever. If he leaves and he does go to Denver or the Raiders, they might win 6, 7 games if they're having a good year. And we always talk about advanced stats. It started in baseball, WAR, wins above replacement. I don't think there's a more significant wins above replacement player in this league than Aaron Rodgers. He turns anybody into a contender almost overnight because there's so much parity in the NFL. And so when you take the MVP, when you take the best quarterback, and you take him off one team and put him on another, even if it's 13-3 versus 4-11-1, the 4-11-1 team is going to be better than the 13-3 team. That's how evenly matched these players are, these teams are, excuse me. And that's what kind of difference he would make almost anywhere. I think he's the best. Peyton Manning's the best example because I always say he's the best regular season quarterback I've ever seen. And if you look at his prime after he got started, which basically was a second year moving forward, very similar to Aaron in that manner. The Colts, a bad year for them was 10 wins. That was the default. You went into camp knowing you're going to win 10. If you had a bad season, you'd win 10. If you had a good season, you'd be up at 13, 12, 13, 14. And, the Super Bowl was always in your reach. And that's what kind of player you're getting with Aaron Rodgers. And that's why the Packers are utterly stupid. And even though I acknowledge Aaron is a pain in the you-know-what, they are utterly, utterly stupid by not keeping him as content as possible.
You mentioned the Raiders. I saw a trade proposal, if you will. Derek Carr to Green Bay, along with a first-round pick next year and a first-round pick the year after, I believe, something of the sort. My point is, if you put Derek Carr on the Green Bay Packers, how many games do they win next year?
Well, I don't think Green Bay would want Derek Carr because they have a quarterback. So, number one, I think they prefer another first-round pick. So if you're giving them 2, they'd rather have 3 first-round picks. So they don't want a quarterback. I mean, they think Jordan Love is the future quarterback. You can argue they're right, you can argue they're wrong, but that's the way they're going to move forward. And that was obviously always the plan, to go from Aaron to Jordan Love. So, people talk about Houston, trading Deshaun Watson earlier, said they needed a quarterback back. If that was going to happen, Russell Wilson, they needed a quarterback back. The Packers don't want a quarterback. So they would have no interest in Derek Carr. None. But short term, to answer the question, because everything's hypothetical, they'd be slightly better because he's ready to play, and Jordan's probably not ready to play.
Last one here for you, John. The NFL sent a memo reminding teams that they are not obligated to pay their players who suffer any type of injury away from the team facility. Fill us in on that story.
Yeah, it's really the NFL sending a big middle finger to the union. Everybody knows these rules. These rules are collectively bargained. There's no team in the league going, oh, we have to pay him. We don't. They understand. And it was just Juwan James got hurt working out on his own, tore his Achilles. Now, if he did that at the team facility, he'd be guaranteed his $10 million. It didn't happen. It's a non-football injury, working out on his own. And we'll see what happens, but Denver is not on the hook to give him his money. You saw this thing happen in Philadelphia with Tim Jernigan. Tim Jernigan got hurt lifting weights on his own. He signed that big extension, and basically the Eagles said, well, we're not going to honor the contract. So Tim eventually renegotiated, took way less money to come back, and unfortunate for him, obviously he never got back physically to what he was, but because he got a herniated disc lifting weights away from the facility, that's a non-football injury. The league put out that memo because the union has been sending out all those statements and urging players to not come in for voluntary work. And look, you're risking something. If you're working out, like you see all those videos of Jalen Hurts, now Jalen's a rookie on his rookie contract, second-year player. He doesn't make a lot of money as a second-round pick. But if he gets hurt, that's a non-football injury. Anybody, if you're away from the facility and not under the auspices of the team, that's the risk you're undertaking. But none of that is new. Everybody knows it. And that was just a tweak, and that tells you how contentious things are between the union and the league when it comes to the offseason, because the union is fighting for no offseason, no OTAs, no mini camps, just show up for training camp and go.
Excellent stuff, John. Appreciate it as always. We'll do it again tomorrow at 7:30. We got to get to the top of the hour break, but appreciate it, man.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. There he is, Johnny Mack. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. All right.